Hello, everybody. I'm back for the second day in a row, and the reason I'm back is because I found I made a mistake in yesterday's analysis. So I wanted to come back and correct that. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Gomes. I'm a Vedic astrologer of 30 years plus, going on around 34 years, close to 35 years now. And I wanted to discuss the Saturn Rahu conjunctions over the past few years, and also discuss this one upcoming in 2025, which I believe is very comparable to what happened in 1968, but it's more condensed. So Saturn and Rahu. So first of all, let me explain what the purpose of this particular broadcast is. Every week, depending on your viewing habits, I come into your homes and I give you an update of the week, and I also give you an analysis of what's happening in the world. Okay, so essentially, this would contain some revisions to what I said yesterday. Overall, the broadcast will not be markedly different, except the 1991 Rahu Saturn conjunction. Rahu's the North Lunar Node, by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with Vedic astrology. And it's responsible for eclipses of the moon, basically. So I'm going to turn the closed captioning on. And so Rahu is responsible for eclipses of the moon. It's considered to be like Saturn, but it gives dissatisfaction. It gives a certain amount of frustration in producing change. It also calls for change. Rahu is essentially what I would like to call an outsider planet. So it doesn't belong to the conventional group of planets that obey the rules and go along with the crowd. Ketu is the other one that's like that. And Venus is their teacher. Venus has the role of being their teacher or their guiding planet in Vedic astrology. So it's just like Jupiter guides the Devas. Venus is the guru or the teacher of the Asuras, and it has that kind of like reform aspect. It looks out for the interests of Rahu and Ketu more so than the other planets, although Venus's close friend is Saturn, and its neutral is Mercury. So essentially, it tends to guide the more disruptive forces in the chart. So essentially, one of the things that I want to discuss, and this broadcast will be broken into three segments, comparing the most recent Rahu Saturn conjunctions, looking forward to the next one, and also looking back to the most comparable Rahu-Saturn conjunction, which occurred in 1960, roughly all through 1968 and into early 1969. So this one, the last one, was much longer lasting than this one will be. This one will only be in 2025, will only be for a couple of months. And I'm also going to discuss how the lunar eclipse or the solar eclipse in Virgo, will affect that. We have a comet appearing right after the solar eclipse. And I'll also go into this week, and I'll also go into projections for your charts for this week as well. And there may be a slight variation between what I put up earlier and what I'm putting up today, which is fine. You can, but basically, I'm pretty consistent in what I say. All right, so basically, Also, if you want to contact me for readings or to find out more about the Saptarishi Gurukulam seminar that's upcoming in July, or if you want to get lessons from me, you can reach me at 508-525-0001. You can text me at that number, or if you prefer email, you can email me at garygomesg@gmail.com. I am going to have some really interesting broadcasts coming up with astrologers I've interviewed and astrologers I plan to interview. And I also have some secret things in the works, which I'm not at liberty to discuss right now. But I have been working on them a long time. And so I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when they come up. So let's get back to the discussion. One of the reasons I'm stressing these is because Saturn Rahu conjunctions tend to be big events. They happen more frequently than you realize. They happen essentially, the last Saturn Rahu conjunction we had was not that long ago. It was around 2014, 2015. And that conjunction occurred in Libra. And I think that actually caused a certain amount of uncomfortableness with the status quo, especially around the world and in the United States. So this was when you saw, and again, these conjunctions don't happen overnight. It's not like this conjunction magically appears. These are slow-moving planets, and they build up speed and they build up anxiety as they approach each other. Okay, so Saturn is limitation, is also the planet connected with the working class or the poor or the people who don't have a lot. And that was around the time that the Tea Party started to gain momentum in the United States. Populist movement started to gain momentum in Europe, and we're seeing a peak of those, or a full flowering of some of those populist movements in Europe right now, and I think it's going to peak over the next year or so. And I think actually this is healthy for the world. And let me explain that for you. Is essentially what's been happening over the past 30 years or so is there has been this large movement towards what I would generously call a meritocracy, but also a move towards what I would call a globalist economy. Now, actually, so that carries a lot of emotional baggage to it. So I want to make clear what I mean by that. Globalist economy is really not run by individual governments. It's run by corporations and by essentially trying to generate what I would call a universalist culture across the world. In theory, there's not a lot wrong with that. We don't want to see people at war with each other because of differences of opinion about economics or religion or any other factions. The problem is it tends to consolidate power in one cluster of society, and those tend to be people who hold power already. So it's not really a splitting up. So essentially, you have what I would call a movement towards a universalist tolerance structure, which is, which actually I'm in favor of, but it tends to take away, it tends to make one agenda for the world, and it shocks existing systems. So a lot of these changes are going to happen regardless of what happens locally, so they're just through changes in technology like artificial intelligence, we are going to see cultural changes. The issue is how are we going to handle these, and how are we going to handle these in a way that hurts the fewest people or hurts nobody. And that hasn't been, as far as I can tell, that hasn't been considered. The other problem with globalism is it tends to justify regime changes. So if there's a particular regime you don't like in power, which essentially has been a standard since, I would say, the 1950s and even earlier across the globe. Essentially you arrange for that country to be put out of power for either economic or political reasons. So essentially what it does is it negates local control, and it's not really selfish on the part of the people who want local control. It's essentially you're not going to want somebody coming into your house and telling you how to do X, Y, and Z. That's sort of like a natural impulse to resist that. So, and also it's tending to raise costs. It's tending to try to impose cultural standards, which many people are not willing to concede just yet. It feels essentially like a shock to the system. And that doesn't mean to imply, but I've studied these phenomena. My first major was history, and I've studied these phenomena for years. That was how I got interested in history. And if you push in one direction, you're going to get resistance. Okay, you're going to get pushback. And essentially, these resistive changes tend to get fought back against. So there was a large, I would call it, in the late 60s, there was this large globalist commercial culture happening around the world. And there was pushback in the early 70s to local control and people to essentially reclaiming their, or attempting to reclaim national autonomy. And like I said, this is natural. This is something which is, so if you push one way, you're going to get resistance from the other. And that's also been happening since the 1990s. So Rahu Saturn tend to throw these changes into stark relief. So essentially, in the last one was in Libra, which was in 2014, 2015, and that pushed back against taxation, against laws, against limitations on freedom, which were seen as being threatening by many people. And this wasn't just in the United States, this was around the world. Now again, there were earlier ones. These are just the ones that I'm viewing as being significant. The one before that was significant, which essentially I screwed up yesterday, was the Rahu Saturn conjunction in 1991, which was actually didn't occur in Pisces. It occurred in Capricorn. So I'm going to pull up that particular combination and show it to you. And let me get the screen up. Sorry to piece one together here. Hold on. All right, so this is the wrong. This is 1969. My apologies. Let me get it. Let me see what I can get. All right, so I'm not sharing a screen yet. Just want to stop the share and start it up again. All right, so this is Saturn, Rahu, Venus, Sun. And this essentially it amounts to structure, okay? So this particular Saturn Rahu conjunction, I remember personally very well because it caused a big change in my life. And we're not going to get into that right now because it's not about me, it's about what happened in the world. But this was also the year in which structure, home, tradition, and to a certain extent, change occurred. So the most remarkable thing I think about 1991, or the two most remarkable things about 1991 was number one, that essentially the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was really when it finally came down, and also the Gulf War. Okay, so a lot of people think it happened earlier. It actually happened in 1991, and this fundamentally changed the structural foundations of both areas. Okay, so essentially, and as a matter of fact, going back to 2014, this was really the period in which a lot of the resentment about globalism started to seep through the cracks. So you had a lot of people just essentially, and I can remember reading reports from Africa, from Africans saying they were tired of globalization threatening their autonomy and their independence. So this wasn't coming from Tea Party right wingers. This was coming from pretty much around the world. And this particular combination over here destabilizes governments, okay? It destabilized. So George H.W. Bush, was viewed as a shoo-in for re-election, especially after the Gulf War and especially after the fall of Russia. I mean, these were momentous events that changed the world. But there was just a certain amount of dissatisfaction. And one of the reasons that they said that he lost was because he broke his promise of no new taxes. And also, it was a very fractious year. 1992 was a very fractious year. In terms of the election, you had a significant third party candidate named H. Ross Perot, and Bill Clinton didn't receive a majority of the popular vote in either of his elections. So I think one of the things, and neither did the other candidate, neither did George H.W. Bush or Bob Dole. So essentially, that set up the foundation for something new. There was a feeling that something new was happening. Now, when that Saturn Rahu comes together and you can see right here, as of January 20th, 1991, this would have signaled that this year would give a break. It would overthrow existing leaders. So Russia, this was also, I think, the year that we opened up trade relations with China. I'm not entirely sure. But, and I don't think Tiananmen Square was that year, but basically you had a lot of shifts in the global economy. So these were significant shifts. East and West Germany coming together earlier. Just a lot of shifts. Also, the European Union, the foundations of the European Union, all those things. So this was a foundational shift. Now, if you see right here, Venus is guiding Saturn and Rahu, but Rahu is with the sun, so that doesn't like existing leaders staying in power. This was also around the time that the UK got John Major, and there were shifts in political leadership all over Europe. So I think that as we look at these things, and you can also see Saturn aspecting Jupiter. Jupiter exalted, but with Ketu. So that would tend to give a warlike environment, okay, in 1991. So I think all these things, and as a matter of fact, the next Iraq war happened when Jupiter was exalted. So I found that fascinating. But essentially, this particular combination would cause societal upheavals. This was the start of a lot of gay marriage initiatives across the country, across the United States, across the world. And it was part of an increasing arc of gay and lesbian acceptance around the world, more standardization of that. But if we go back to, let's just go back to, so this would give structural change. Pisces shifts. So we'll go back to 1968. And again, admittedly, I am being selective about these things. I'm not looking at every Saturn Rahu change that happened over the past 20 years, but the one in Pisces is significant because essentially Saturn only enters Pisces once every 30 years or so. And the last Saturn and Pisces conjunction was in around 1998 to 2000, which essentially led to the World Trade Center bombings, which is, again, connected to a certain extent with terrorism, obviously, but also the World Trade Center was chosen as a target because it represented industrial power. And so I'm not defending the World Trade Center bombings. I'm just saying this was the motivation. This was part of the motivation behind it. And I think it was I think it was a horrible act. I'm not laughing because it was funny. It was a horrible act, but it tended to feed off those things. And it's essentially this Saturn Rahu conjunction will force change in habits of thought and beliefs. So what happened in 1968? Well, we had kind of a weird, it was one of the weirdest election years I can remember in my entire life. We had a sitting president in the middle of a war, and the common logic is a president who's in the middle of a war will not be defeated for re-election. But Johnson got opposition from within his own party, and that came first of all from Eugene McCarthy, then from Robert F. Kennedy. And it looked like, and again, we had assassinations of very prominent people that year. So we had both RFK and Martin Luther King assassinated within about a month of each other. And if you look for, let me just go over here. So let's go to May of 1968. So this was almost exactly, May of 1968 was almost exactly when the conjunction occurred. And if you go to, and the last conjunction was, I think, yeah, around February of 1969, after Nixon took office, was essentially the last stages of the conjunction. So again, these things, and you had massive student protests during all of 1968. You had massive, this was essentially the height of both urban riots and student protests. And we're seeing student protests happening right now. And we'll probably see escalation of student protests over the next few months. That's my guess because of the conjunction happening in. So let's go to 2025. Let's go ahead just a little bit to 2025. So around April 15th of 2025 is when the conjunction's almost exact. It doesn't last very long. Rahu will move out of the sign within a couple of months, and the Saturn Rahu conjunction will not occur again. So this crossover essentially between roughly mid-March to around the end of May will be sort of a stressful period in United States history. The Venus conjunction will actually produce some good results from it because Venus in that sign, like Venus in the sign connected with Capricorn, will actually bring about some new belief systems. Venus is exalted in that sign. The problem is Mercury is debilitated, and that will make a few conversations or communications more difficult. And as I said earlier on, this could give an excuse for war because we have a Mars debilitated and a Moon debilitated at the same time. But that's a very short, the Moon debilitation, this is an exact degree of debilitation, by the way. Mars debilitation is not the exact point. But they're almost really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're 5 signs away from each other. Uranus is with Jupiter. We'll talk about Uranus just for a second, although I don't normally use it in my broadcast. And this will give a conventional treatment of law. Saturn's aspecting Jupiter. We should see a break of inflationary pressure between now and next March. That break will come back with a vengeance, I would say, in early March. This could also cause stock market panic. This could also cause increased desire for military rule or for martial law because things will feel a little bit out of control. The sun is strong. And there may be a recession And what sets that up is really this particular combination, which is the eclipse in October. I'm just going to go straight to October 2nd. I'm not going to go to the exact eclipse time. 2nd of 2024. Oh, okay. I can do that. Of course, I can do that. 2024, October 2nd. Jeez. All right, so our eclipse occurs in Sun. Mercury is exalted, which is good, but it's really close to the Sun. K2's there. There will be massive lies told around this particular eclipse. Massive lies. Okay. Mars is aspecting the eclipse house. So that tends to underscore it. I wouldn't be surprised to see a large outbreak of hostilities around this time, maybe even assassination attempts around this time. And I've said this before, so I'm expecting to see a lot of protests because I'm not expecting the United States to back off in its support of Israel, and that will be a trigger for a lot of protests. Also, it's not really good for the current administration, but it's also not good for opposing parties because the opposing parties will tend to have obstacles or maybe even like massive lies told about it. So if this were an even year, I would say, or a period in which the planetary combinations were a bit less erratic and a bit less panic, moving towards a panic mode, I would think that that we would see a relatively straight pattern in the election. I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see kind of a squiggly pattern. I don't think we're going to see elections called off, but there will be certain claims of misrepresentation, of lying, of media manipulation that we saw in the last election. So I think this is going to be, so keep your eyes and ears open. As opposed to watching commercials, try to do a little bit of research because you're a discriminating bunch. Try to do a little bit of research on what was actually said and what was actually done earlier in the year on both parties' parts. On the two major parties' parts. This could mean the incumbent may not make it to the election, but that's a little bit of an overgeneralization, which I don't feel comfortable making. So this is for the eclipse of October 2nd. This is a linking point between where we are right now and the Saturn Rahu conjunction. Okay. So Saturn is backing away from Rahu, is minimizing the panic right now during this particular phase. But Mars is moving towards its debilitation sign and is going to stay in that debilitation sign for a while. Okay, so keep that in mind. The other thing is, with this Rahu over here, with this Rahu in Bhadra Nakshatra, it'll be awfully easy to sleep and miss things. Okay, so Mercury is very strong and very potent, but again, there's a tendency to make up stories. And this particular eclipse I feel is potentially more damaging. You may even see some small conflicts breaking out in the east. Connected with this, Pakistan is in trouble, and so are a lot of countries. Around the world. Europe is in very bad shape right now, so that's why they're getting. It isn't just xenophobia; it's really they're being pushed to their limits in terms of what they can support, in terms of accommodating migration. And the United States, some of the larger communities in the United States are being pushed to that limit as well. So I'm not saying that as an anti-immigration person. I'm saying that just in terms of like real resources being utilized. Also, this gives a lot of power to media groups to essentially kind of short circuit people and analyze and overanalyze what they're saying. So this is not really a good combination. So again, this is going to be one of the most questionable elections I've seen in my lifetime. Just prepare yourself. Let's see now. So let's go on to what's happening right now. So I don't mean to scare you, but again, watch out for economic shocks. Watch out for inflation coming back again next year. And just be careful. Just be critical. Okay. All right. So as we're speaking right now, we have Sun is in the first house. I'm sorry, the Lord of the first house is the Sun is placed in the 11th house, which should be somewhat good for gains, good for financial gains. Mercury's, at least as far as I can tell, outside of the range of combustion. It's, according to the classical text, it's not, but as far as I'm concerned, it is. Venus is almost out of the range of combustion. Saturn is still fairly strong. It's basically in what they call, it's in its weakest degrees in Aquarius, but it's still a dominant planet. And Saturn's aspecting Mars, which is making people very, very critical and very, very hyper analytical right now, and also afraid to make changes or buy things. Okay. And I think that's a reasonable assessment. One of the interesting things that I'm seeing is we're looking at employment. We're not really getting the full picture on employment because the Mars is in the 9th house, Saturn's aspecting Mars. I've run across a fair share of IT professionals who are having trouble getting jobs. So essentially, some skilled trades are actually drying up a little bit. Some trades you think would be booming or not booming. And I think that, so we're seeing a lot of what we used to call middle managers supplanted by technology companies. I've discussed this before. And AI can do their jobs, basically. It's not really, a lot of their jobs are just intermediaries. But they can cut down on the number of staff they support, which will increase their bottom line, which is what any business does. And Rahu's in the 8th house, so that does indicate some behind the scene conspiracies connected with law and governance. Okay. So the moon is in Sagittarius. It's about to enter Capricorn. It's a full moon today, so this isn't a bad time. The Hora Lagna is in the same sign with moon, and this is a wealth indicator in the chart, or a financial opportunity indicator in the chart. So that's actually not a bad placement. Saturn's in Aquarius, as we've said before. So we have 1, 2, 3 planets in their own signs. K2 is placed in a somewhat favorable sign. K2 likes being in Mercury's sign. Moon is not well placed in Sagittarius. It's the Lord of the 8th house from where Sagittarius is. And Saturn aspect Mars, like I said, sort of like freezes people in action. They're worried about how things will look. They're worried about how things will go. And I think that I'm looking at the debates this coming week, this combination with Saturn in the 7th house. So this would be Biden's Lagna, would be over here in Scorpio. And he's got Jupiter aspect in the 7th house. So this will be generally favorable for him. Although, at least from this combination over here, Sun, Mercury, Venus combination, this would represent his opponent. And the opponent would be essentially telling the truth. If we look at Trump's rising sign, this is Leo, Saturn's in the 7th house. The opponent will look bad, but his opponent will be essentially trying to shade people. And I'm not saying that because of a like or a dislike of either candidate. This is what the chart is saying. Okay. But I think long term, will it affect the election? I don't know. I think this is an opportunity to see both candidates, not necessarily unfiltered, because this is really kind of an unorthodox debate structure. There's no audience. There's no yes, on CNN, which is not really a favorable network for the opposition, and it's also, but the other thing is certain weaknesses the incumbent has will be amplified, to be honest, because Saturn's aspecting his 1st house. Okay. So Saturn aspects tend to destroy things. So Saturn aspect in the 1st house will tend to hurt Trump. Saturn aspect in the 1st house in Biden's chart will tend to hurt Biden. It's more harmful to career for Biden than it is for Trump. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what finally happens. It'll be interesting to see whether or not my analysis is correct. And Sun, Mercury, and Venus in the 11th house indicate that Trump may actually gain support from this combination. But it will be difficult. This is not an easy debate for either candidate, to be truthful. So let's look at I want to talk about that. Let's look at the world still some problems in the world, still some stalemates, at least for another month in terms of war and conflicts. You'll probably see the release of money to Israel within about a month's time. That'll cause more protests, I think. Saturn aspects Mars. But you'll also see the attempts at a peace resolution in Israel. The other thing is you have Saturn in, you have Rahu in the 8th, so a lot of discontent will be hidden, at least for a couple of months. But I think it'll pop up again in the summertime. And if we have, it's interesting because the French elections is a French snap election. And I'm going to say this isn't good for the incumbent. This isn't good for Macron. Now, whether or not Le Pen will, it doesn't look like Le Pen's party will win an outright majority. And it's possible Macron could form a coalition to maintain power, but that looks unlikely to me. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I'm sensing a shift in a lot of countries around the world. Certainly a more conservative or more populist ethic taking place. Canada is also up for a change. I don't think their election is this year, but Canada is also up for a change. The UK is definitely up for a change, but Farage may do better than I initially suspected. It doesn't mean Labour won't win, but Farage may actually wage an upset. And let's see now, Jupiter, but that looks unlikely to me, to be honest. And Jupiter's aspect in K2, so there'll be a lot of unexpected outcomes in the elections. A lot of contestations in the elections over the next few months. So this will be an interesting election year. In terms of the economy, Mars is stuck over here. Saturn's aspecting Mars, so construction will still be limited. Oil production will still be limited. That will have pressure. As I said, I don't think employment figures are being reflected accurately, but that's my bias. And let's see now. So let's look at the individual signs really quickly. So since I did this yesterday, I'll spend a little bit less time on these than normal. Mars is, but I really want to correct what I was saying about 1991. All right, so let's go back over here. Mars in the first house for Aries indicates increased wealth, increased ambition, unexpected obstacles and foes at work, overall good luck, and increased work responsibility for this particular sign, but a lot of expenses on unnecessary things. For Taurus, good for finances, expenditures on relationship partners, difficult for children. Children will be a little bit problematic or difficult to understand. Let's see now, Moon's in the 8th house. Some problems with siblings and with ambitions. Ambitions will have to be hidden away. Saturn's in the 10th, very good for work. Rahu's in the 11th, not as much pay coming from that work. And Mars is in the 12th, so still too many expenses. Gemini, Sun, Mercury, Venus are in the first house. It forms a Raj Yoga for this particular rising sign, which is very auspicious, is very good. But Sun, Mercury, and Venus, so good for fulfillment of ambitions. Some ability to save for this sign because Jupiter's in the 12th, but again, it's a little bit suspect because Jupiter tends to make us overambitious, so there'll be more credit card purchases. And K2's in the fourth house, also some limitation on mobility because of Mars in the 11th house. K2's in the fourth house, some emotional fear, which will last until really the end of the year. And Moon does indicate change or shifting in relationship partnerships. A lot of focus on that currently, but will be change. And in terms of career, there'll be some career growth, but it'll be publicity. The actual returns will be a little bit disappointing, at least until next month. For Cancer, Cancer has the Moon in the sixth house, so it's a bit of a struggle time for this particular sign. K2's in the third, so it'll be relatively fearless. Sun, Mercury, and Venus give good opportunities for saving. Don't spend too much. Jupiter's in the 11th, good for financial gains. Mars is in the 10th, good for career life for this particular sign. And Saturn's in the 8th, so it's a good time to reconstruct career opportunities. For Leo, Leo has Sun in the 11th house, good for financial gains. K2, it's a little bit difficult. K2 in the second house for this sign is a little bit difficult because it does mean this sign will be spending an awful lot of money, especially on speech. Jupiter's aspecting K2, though, that's a good thing that actually helps K2 out. And let's see now, Mars is in the 9th house, which is good for career. Jupiter's in the 10th house, which is good for career. Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the 11th house, very good for career. Saturn's in the 7th, so that's the only blockage to this sign right now. But if it perseveres, it can gain high status. Moon is in the 5th house, so some of past deeds will come back to haunt it. That can cause some losses. And Rahu's in the 8th, so there will be some conspiracy behind the back of this particular sign. But basically, this is not a bad week for Leo. For Virgo, K2's in the 1st house, Rahu's in the 7th house. Intuition is enhanced. Distress or feeling of isolation from relationship partner is very strong with this combination. Saturn's in the 6th house. There's a strong ability to overcome obstacles and enemies. Moon is in the 4th house, so there'll be some change, some emotional change in home environment. But again, be careful for this sign because you will be attracted to a lot of different potential relationship partners, and they really won't be that great. It's actually good for foreign business partners, so that's good. Jupiter's Mars is in the 8th house. Relationship life can feel very difficult for this sign this month. Jupiter's in the 9th, though, very good for business. And the Lord of the First is in the 10th, very good for fulfilling business ambitions, but there is a potential to spend too much money. For Libra, Libra has Mars in the 7th house. Again, not a good combination for relationships. There'll be a lot of fights with business partners or relationship partners, but there will be unexpected gains of money. Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the 9th house, which is very good for teaching. Saturn's in the 5th, which is very good for learning. Saturn's aspecting Mars, so it's not going to be impulsive about seeking out new relationship partners. Rahu's in the 6th. That's good for overcoming enemies. Moon is in the 3rd, so that can give changing ambitions. K2 in the 12th is interesting because it can really increase the spiritual ambitions of the sign a great deal. So that's actually, it starts to care less about money, which is unique for Libra. Scorpio is the 1st house for this next chart. Lord of the First is in the 6th in its own sign. So that's actually quite good. So to give this this particular sign chance to overcome enemies or obstacles, but with a great deal of effort because Saturn's aspecting. Moon is in the second house, good for financial growth. Rahu's in the fifth house. Children will be a little bit greedy or ambitious. Mercury's in Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the eighth house, so there'll be unexpected benefits from relationship partners. Good opportunities for relationship partners or for new business partnerships. K2, Scorpio, don't trust your friends. For Sagittarius, Moon is in the first house, indicates a change over the coming week for this particular rising sign. Saturn is in the third house, gives this sign a good deal of ambition. Rahu's in the fourth house, change or unrest for this particular sign. This is a U.S. chart, by the way. So Sagittarius suns have a great deal in common with United States chart. And this is the rising sign, not the sun sign for the United States. Mars is in the fifth house. So again, there'll be this conflict, maybe based on racial patterns, maybe based on patterns of discrimination. But with Jupiter entering Capricorn, you can expect the country to become a bit more conservative or a bit more, trying to think of a good way to put it, a bit more moderate in its goals. Sun, Mercury, Venus, good for potential allies, good for potential relationships. K2's in the 10th house, so again, there's an inability to get things done. For Capricorn, Capricorn has Saturn in the second house, so there's a lot of focus on money, a lot of focus on house, on housing. Rahu's in the third, very ambitious. Jupiter's in the fifth. This sign will do very well financially. Sun, Mercury, Venus, it will have to stay competitive though. And K2's in the ninth house, so unexpected ups and downs in income. Moon is in the 12th, so you have to be careful about relationship partners spending too much money. For Aquarius, Aquarius has Saturn in the first house. This is kind of a leadership combination. Mars is a very strict placement. Saturn, Mars is a very strict placement. This sign will be very tough on itself. It will also be very threatening in some ways, very greedy in some ways. Jupiter is in the fourth house. It does tend to put a lot of focus on doing the right thing by family. Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the fifth house. Good luck from previous efforts. K2's in the eighth house, so there's a lot of exploration of behind the scenes activities like occult subjects, but also even investigations. It doesn't necessarily always have to be occult if it's eighth house. It doesn't always, there can be some unexpected deaths though. And so basically that's it for Aquarius. And finally, last but not least, we have Pisces. Pisces has Rahu in the first house. Will make the sign a little bit greedy, attracted to unusual or unconventional partners. Mars is in the second house, make the sign kind of aggressive, prone to trouble in relationship life. Jupiter's in the third, and this will make it career ambitious, give it career ambitions. Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the fourth house, so that tends to put a lot of focus on relationship life, although relationship partners will seem to be elusive or a little bit unpredictable. And Moon is in the 10th house, could indicate a change in job or career. So let's move on to the space, the time-space change map. I'm going to do this over again. And let's see now. So we're going to go zoom out. All right. All right. So what's going on here? All right. So let's go. All right. So this is good. So yesterday, when I looked at the map, we had Saturn near Hawaii. So this still does indicate economic problems for Hawaii, and also for Alaska. There's a Rahu line, which is moving closer to the west coast of the United States. And we still do have this Mars line running through roughly west central United States, around Wyoming, New Mexico, Montana, and let's see now, and Mexico itself. So we can see some disruptions there. There's a Jupiter line running through Panama, and I know El Salvador is having its elections right now. There's a great deal of controversy around what El Salvador has done to solve its crime problem. But interestingly enough, there is some indication they're getting results from it. I'm not necessarily saying I approve of the means they're using, but they are getting some results from it. And there's a Jupiter line, and there's a Saturn line encompassing the east coast of the United States. So this could mean changes in structure and governance. And also, the Jupiter line is running really close to Washington, D.C., down through Cuba, and down through Panama and into Ecuador. Now, this Jupiter line isn't necessarily beneficial. I want to keep people's perspectives on Jupiter. Jupiter's in an unfriendly sign. It'll do some good there, but it will also tend to create struggles over rights and struggles over whether or not the government's doing the right thing, struggles in the courts. And this Saturn line right next to Jupiter tends to mean, at least to my mind, essentially feelings of want or a need, and that people aren't getting what they want. This is particularly true in Guinea, Venezuela, Brazil, and all the way down through Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and into Bolivia. So there's a Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Rahu line. So we can expect to see some government scandals in Brazil. There's a, let me see if I can get this to move over. There's a moon line running close to Cape Verde and the Azores. So those islands could have some financial problems. And let's see now. There's a Mars line running through Paris, Sweden, close to England, and through Spain, and through Morocco, and Western Africa down the Ivory Coast. So we can expect to see some violence in those countries, maybe even Belgium. So this could indicate, problems connected with the French elections. Let's see now. The only other line is Saturn running through Turkey. So this could indicate hardships in the economies in Finland, all the way through Poland and Eastern Europe, all the way down to Turkey, and all the way down to Egypt and Sudan, and all the way down to South Africa. South Africa is having a difficult time of it lately. We're seeing all these Sun, Venus, Mercury lines running up through, and also a descending Sun line running through Iran, and a Rahu line running through Iran. So I'm thinking that this will affect Ukraine, Iran, all the way through Saudi Arabia, and maybe even down into Zanzibar because of these. This will make Iran highly visible. It will make Pakistan and Afghanistan highly visible. And there is a Mars line, as opposed to yesterday when there was a Jupiter line running through India. There's a Mars line. And India may be forced into some action, some kind of martial action up near Pakistan. There's a moon line running through China, through basically Tibet, but China, is still Tibet's still part of China. And also there's a Jupiter line running through Cambodia and Laos and Myanmar and close to Vietnam. So this entire peninsula right here is going to be prosperous, but caged in. Saturn is caging in China, so this part of the country is going to be hurt. So is the Philippines and Borneo and Indonesia. And I'm seeing some potential for growth in Japan, Australia, but also some government scandals coming in through Korea and Japan, and all the way down into Guinea and all the way down into Australia. There's a Mars line running through New Zealand, so you may see some protests in New Zealand. So that's it for the week. Sorry for the second post, but I think this is a more accurate reading, and I hope you bear with me, and I hope you look at this. Venus will moderate. I did get a question about last week's forecast. Venus will moderate that conjunction in Pisces to a very large extent because Venus is exalted. So it will actually help reform. But I have to warn you, I think this is an increasingly conservative trend. And over the next year or so, it'll be kind of dicey. People will feel a little bit uncertain about the future. The potential for war is very strong. I'm hoping we avoid it. Or if so, I don't want to see any wars happen. If so, they're only regional wars or a series of regional wars. But I really don't like the idea that the United States reactivated the selective service the past week. That's not a good sign. And I'm also just kind of tired of the brinksmanship I've seen practiced over the past 30 years from the neoconservative community. I don't think it's been healthy for the world personally. That's just my personal opinion. So, but again, that's my personal opinion versus the overall astrological map. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your patience with me. And I'll be back next week with more exciting news. In the meanwhile, please subscribe, like, and comment. I appreciate your comments immensely. I love you all, and I want what's best for you, as long as it's what you want for yourself. Okay? So with that rather enigmatic expression, I'll sign off and say thank you for watching. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great week. Maximize your advantages, minimize your weaknesses. Okay? Bye, everyone.